was okay. I feel like it's a well-known episode because, of course, it took place on a subway. Um, Very typical New York life, as it should. Um, it's just not one of my favorite episodes. I don't hate it, but it's just okay. But it's not an episode that I would go out of my way to watch more than one. Well, not more than once, but like if I was just scheming, like scheming through and just picking out, like, oh, I like this episode, I'd be like, this episode was fine. It wasn't my favorite. It was funny. It was good, but just wasn't not one of my top favorite episodes, in the series. It was definitely a different episode for the cast because throughout the whole week of shooting, they really only saw each other just once. Because they basically, the four of them went off on their own separate ways, telling four different stories that took place on a subway. The subway in general, the set, was actually rented from a recent Warner Brothers movie that they let them rent the set because them trying to build their own subway set was going to cost a lot of money, so it was better off for them just to rent that one. I guess the behind the scenes fact, of course, about the subway, since it was the main story. I guess they put it, they put the subway car on the set, and then they had it manually rocked with several 2x4s, and of course they kept like redecorating with like different posters and rotating with different people, just of course just make it look like they were literally on separate lines from whatnot. I'm basically just going to, instead of just going in order of the scenes, I'm basically just going to since it's four separate stories, since none of the story characters really came together until at the beginning and the end, I'll just, talk about each story individually. So, well, it starts off with, they were together, they all four of them had different plans that day. Jerry, was going to Coney Island because his car that was stolen in the alternate side was found and impounded. So he had to go out to Coney Island to pick that up. And while he was out there, he wanted to take a ride on the Cyclone at Coney Island. He was trying to get someone else to go with him, but everybody else wouldn't go because they had other things they had to do. Elaine was going to a lesbian wedding, and she was going to be the best man. She had that to go to. George had a job interview, his second interview at this place. And Kramer was going off to court to try to wiggle his way out of a couple parking tickets he was owed for. So they did get on the subway, and they just discussed a few things. Jerry was tired, which is just basically his main thing, throughout the whole subway ride, and also the fact he sat across from a guy who had no clothes on, but that was on the other one. But also in the only subway scene, like on the actual subway, the four of them are together. We see Elaine. I'm sorry. No, it's not Elaine. We see this guy who's walking around, just asking for like donations, like a Salvation Army type person. And you think he's just just like someone, one of those guys just wandered around there wanting change. But of course, you didn't know that he was going to be kind of helping one of the four of them out later in the episode. We'll come back to him. Of course, there is that scene that is it's used for a lot of the scene is used for a lot of highlight videos and whatnot, but where the four of them walk out of the subway and they go their separate ways for the rest of the episode, and they walk away, and Elaine and Sanders goes, "See ya." But let's get to the four stories. Now, two of them turned out good. Two of them turned out bad. So the first one was Jerry, who he was on a subway heading out to Coney Island, which I've been to New York, and it's the last stop on the subway. So it's probably like a very long ride. I don't know how long it is, but it's a pretty long ride, depending on where you get on a subway in New York. But he was tired, and he kept falling asleep. And then when he wakes up, there's a guy sitting across, like an overweight person. And he just kept staring down Jerry, who was sleepy. And then Jerry wakes up, and the guy was completely naked. But they ended up becoming friends, and they talked. And he agreed to go on the rides with Jerry. They actually went on the Cyclone. I think they got some Nathan's hot dogs, I think. But they had so much fun that by the time they were done, the station was closed and Jerry was not able to get his car. But he still had a good day. I'll save Kramer for last. George, he gets on this subway. He's sitting next to a very good-looking woman. And obviously, she was trying to get his attention. She started, pointing her hand and, moving it on her leg. And obviously, she was trying to, get George's attention. Her and George struck up a conversation, and she, basically was first thought, said, "Are you looking for a job?" But George's like, "Oh, no, I'm not looking for a job. I was just looking for the stocks in this newspaper." But she said, "You don't look like a guy who needs a job." So they had a good chat, and then when it was her stop, George decides to go with her. And they end up going to a hotel. And first off, the woman was taller than George, which makes me think, foreshadowing something that George said in a future episode we actually will be talking about in 2 episodes. Well, technically 3, because there's a 2-parter we're about to get to. But basically, the woman was just a con artist. She took George to the hotel, told him to get comfortable. She went to the bathroom, came out in a lingerie. But then instead of, getting funky with George, she handcuffed him to the bed, went back to the bathroom, put her clothes on, and took George's clothes off. George took his clothes off, but before it got funkier or whatnot, she handcuffed him to the bed. And then she basically was trying to rob him, and he only had $8, and because he only had $8, and she felt like she was tricked, which George was the one tricked here. She took George's clothes, so George was left handcuffed in the hotel room, and he basically came back, and Jerry was just. He told Jerry, "Get your spare key and just give me to your apartment so I get your spare key." It was in there. Hold on, there's one thing I forgot. There was also, this is also the first episode where Jerry was calling George Biff, as he was comparing George to Biff Loman, who was famous from the Arthur Miller play Death of a Salesman, because George is obsessive about minor details, especially the possibility of someone not liking him when he goes to a job interview. So this is the first episode also where Jerry started calling George Biff, which was pretty funny, like Biff. Or when he came into the restaurant in just a towel in this episode, because obviously he didn't have his clothes. That one guy's going, "Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna," and George was in no mood. He's just like, "Don't ask me what happened, just take me to your apartment, I get your spare key," because he was just humiliated, and yeah, he missed out on a job because of this hot woman. Elaine's story was changed. Originally, Elaine's story was going to be she did not feel comfortable about going on a subway. It was going to be going through Harlem. But they were afraid to do that storyline because they were afraid that it might come across as racist and such. So instead, they went with her being the best man at a lesbian wedding, which wasn't as controversial. Well, it was still, obviously, it was frowned upon more back then, but obviously it was before, it's become a lot more talked about today, basically, about same-sex marriages and whatnot. But Elaine was going to be the best man at a lesbian wedding, which she was making conversation with an older lady on the subway, and she got a little freaked out by her saying she was going to do a lesbian wedding. And Elaine mentions the line, she goes, "I'm not into women like that." She goes, "I hate men, but I don't like women like that," basically. But her main thing was she got her subway car broke down, and she missed the wedding. It was also the first episode. They had a lot of profanity. They had Elaine thinking things, and she'd have actual dialogue while she's on the subway. But she had the facial expressions, of course. But obviously, she got a lot of stuff bleeped out as for profanity. And again, she missed the wedding. And of course, in the last scene, whenever Jerry's telling him about his good day, Elaine was just in no mood. She's like, "Good for you." She's supposed to say "F off" or kiss, blow it out your ass and whatnot. But even in the blooper reel, she couldn't. After Jerry said, "Oh, so you missed the wedding? You'll catch the bris." She's supposed to say something like that, but she just couldn't get through. She just kept laughing, so they just cut it. But also, this is around the time where Julia Louis-Dreyfus had actually just gotten recently pregnant, but she was also very sick. So The wedding gift she was carrying around was supposed to, block, cover her stomach to protect her pregnant belly. Even though after a while, apparently they just gave up and said, you know what, screw it. What if Elaine just got fat, basically, is what they went with after a while. They gave up trying to hide her pregnancy. But also, she was very sick. So, like, when she's on the subway and when, of course, she's freaking out, they used the fact that, obviously, she was, like, breathing heavy because she wasn't feeling well as, like, her, getting stressed out and whatnot. So they covered up pretty good, which I will say was a nice way to cover it up, because I would have never known that if it wasn't said in the inside look. And then finally, Kramer. Kramer did go to the courthouse. I don't know what happened with those tickets, but while he's on the way over, he overhears something about a horse, about a big horse that to bet on. That is pretty much like a win-win usually. Kramer, though, which this is the first time it's shown that Kramer has a little bit of a history of gambling, after done at the courthouse, goes to bet on the horse. It bets $600. And at first he was losing big time, but then the horse made a comeback and he won. He had a big winning. But then some guy tried to rob him, who was there, chased him down the subway, tried to rob him. Just when, he looked dead for Kramer, Kramer just ran into that guy who was on the subway earlier when the four of them were together, that was basically collecting change and whatnot. That guy was an undercover police officer, and he arrested the thug. At the end of the episode, of course, whenever Jerry heads back to his apartment to let George in to get his spare key to get his clothes, since, again, the scam woman took everything, Kramer put down the money and paid for the meal. The first time that he did all series. And that's a Subway. Like I said, it's an okay episode. Like, it's very New York-y episode, like, especially with it being, like, Subway life and whatnot. It's just not one that stands out to me that much. I mean, in some ways, yes, I feel like it is like a premiere episode for them, of course. But to me, like, as for one of my personal favorites, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites. But it's okay. But that's my thoughts on the Subway. Next one's another decent one that I only really like it for just one scene in general, but it's still a good episode. The Pez dispenser. And after that, big 2-part episode to talk about, which I can't wait for that one. So guys, what are your thoughts on the Subway? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. Be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content coming to my channel. Follow me on Twitter at DemandAirBoy93. Until then guys, I'll check it out. I'll see you guys in the next review. Have a great rest of your night. Peace out, everybody.